Hi, everyone. Welcome back to being the best version of yourself. I'm your host, Dr. Carey Heller. All right, today we have an awesome guest. Chloe, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Chloe. I am a performance coach and I specialize in helping people with ADHD and nervous system dysregulation overcome their overwhelm and their challenges and transform their ADHD into a superpower.
All right, great. And so, not surprisingly, our topic today is all about ADHD, really focusing on how to help you as a listener to develop your own comprehensive approach towards really thriving with ADHD. So, what do you feel like for someone that's either newly diagnosed or maybe they've been on similar medication for a long time but haven't done much else? Where do you feel like are some good starting points for people, especially adults that are kind of struggling with ADHD or just are not really thriving the way that they want to?
Yeah, that's a very fantastic question. So I would just first ask yourself, where are you struggling most? Very often, when I meet people that are recently diagnosed, especially women, usually one of their biggest pain points is overwhelm and procrastination. And so I really like to start with the nervous system and teaching the body that it's safe. Because if we are constantly stuck in fight or flight, we're not going to be able to access flow states. We're not going to be able to learn to commit things to memory. Our digestion's going to be worse. Everything gets a lot easier when your nervous system is regulated. And so I always suggest you start with two things is where in your life can you just go a little bit slower and teach your nervous system that, okay, I am safe. And then number two is learning a regulation tool so that when you do get dysregulated, it's really easy to come back to baseline. And so practicing that every single morning when you are calm or when you are dysregulated, and then starting to use that tool when you do get dysregulated. So one of my favorite tools is the physiological sigh. It's just two sharp inhales through the nose and one long exhale out the mouth like this. And that will bring your heart rate back down really rapidly. And it's an amazing tool to use even when you're at the gym or before you have to give a talk or presentation. I actually did that before the podcast. So I would calm my nerves and get a little more blood flow to the brain. And then the next thing I would suggest is really learn tools on how to boost your dopamine in the moment when you need it, especially when you are like starting a task. We need a lot of activation energy to start a task. I always say that, like, if you have a task to do, it's almost like there's this door of resistance. And so we have to figure out how to open the door. And one way is to regulate because sometimes we're just too scared to even open the door and then we won't even try. So that's why we're paralyzed and frozen. Another way to open the door is to get momentum, and that's having enough dopamine and motivation to push the door open. And so one way we can do that is with movement. So sometimes if I'm feeling stuck, I'll go for a walk, I'll do a little bit of exercise, I might even jump up and down and blast really good music to get some dopamine.
Yeah.
And there's some really cool tools out there. One really famous one, I think it was Andrew Huberman who talked about this. It's called the fixed gaze. And if you actually just stare at a point in the middle of your computer screen with out shifting your eyes, you just stare at the point and you can blink, that's okay. But you do this for 60 seconds, it increases acetylcholine and it actually increases your ability to focus and learn for a decent amount of time after that. And I find that tool so handy when you need to lock in. But that was a lot. Do you have any questions on that? Sorry, I just went
No,
off
no,
on a
I think
tangent.
that was a great starting point in terms of giving people some really great advice in terms of how to approach things. I think
Mhm.
it's very practical, which is really useful and important. And certainly, I think there's the element of the follow through, and that is great to have strategies, but oftentimes, you see, it's often hard to remember in the moment to do it. I mean, so one of the things I
Mhm.
find helpful for a lot of this stuff is not overdoing it to maybe have a reminder. So if you know that you're about to start stuff at this a certain time, use the reminders app or some other reminder system that works for you, or even a sticky note in front of you to say, use this strategy with the idea that it kind of prompts you in the moment to remind you to do it. So I think that's one thought I had off of what you said. I feel like there's a lot, I could probably talk all day just on the stuff you said to start. But one of the things that really stands out to me is what I like to call the idea of harnessing fidgeting to improve focus. The idea that
Mhm.
basically, I'm a big fan of this. The idea that basically, if you're not, sufficiently stimulated to do a task, you're not going to be as focused. But and if you just randomly fidget, I mean, it may work okay, but you may also get yourself distracted or other people around you. But if you can use controlled movement, and for adults, if you're working at home or even working in an office setting, if you have your own office or at least your own sort of space, there's a lot of things you can do. Like, so probably a couple of my favorites around this are using a desk elliptical. They're like this big, and you can basically pedal under your desk while you're working. So I think that can
Mhm.
be really helpful. And things like these are my favorites for standing, like the whirly board. It's like a balance board.
Cool. That's awesome.
So there's a lot you can do. It's important to be creative. And a lot of these things are not super expensive. I mean, you may have a lot of these kind of laying around or sitting on a yoga ball, but the idea of basically figuring out what else can you do to get movement in throughout the day. I mean, again, it's very important to take breaks as well, certainly, and
Mhm.
not get all of your movement in front of your desk. But the idea is that instead of just sitting still while you're at working, if you have a hard time with that, harnessing the fidgeting in an intentional way can really be useful. There's something I thought of as it's kind of going off of the moving piece you mentioned, because I think it is such an important thing.
Yes, I actually have something to add to this because I used to struggle so much with dissociation in conversation. And so I really had to find a way to keep myself present. And I've actually found hand massage to be an amazing tool for this. And it's super discreet. And if you just press in the middle of your palm like this with your thumb and give it a massage, there's actually acupressure points that cause you to relax, but it's also very grounding. It brings you more into your body and into the present moment. This has really enabled me to be able to stick with conversations instead of drifting off and thinking about lunch or all the other work I have to do while I'm in conversation.
That's great. Yeah, I'd actually never thought of that in terms of that piece of it with the way you push your hands. That's great. Again, I think another very like practical strategy. Because the thing
Mhm.
is, in reality is depending on what you're doing, you can't always have a hand fidget in front of you.
Mhm.
If you're doing something virtually, it's quite easy. I mean, I'm sure if I was holding something right now, you wouldn't see it. But in day to day life, whilst I think it's helpful to have some stuff, something like this is keychain is fairly discreet. But even so, if you're in person with someone, then someone may perceive it funny if look like you're fiddling with something. So I think that idea, something that's extremely discreet, doesn't involve any other physical stuff, I think is great.
Mhm. Yeah, it's amazing in conversation too, or if you're having a little bit of anxiety come up, it's really handy to give yourself a hand massage.
And I think something else I was thinking about from what you said before is this idea that when we're talking about ADHD, a lot of times what people are experiencing are not just ADHD. I mean, it seems like you allude to a lot of, kind of coexisting anxiety, which is quite common.
Absolutely. I see this so much in women where most women with ADHD just live in this constant state of overwhelm or paralysis.
Well, and again, I think it's definitely it is the idea of feeling overwhelmed. I mean, I see that sort of at all ages.
Mhm.
Both sort of men and women, but in general. But I also think it's sometimes that people don't always notice that they don't always attribute it to being anxious. They often attribute it to various other things. And so I think recognizing that the anxiety is a crucial part and targeting that and how you're approaching things is also really crucial, because if you just try to target all of the ADHD symptoms in like a blanket form, you're going to miss a lot.
Mhm. Completely agree with that.
I think when you think about like kind of like holistic health and like taking a step back, really
Mhm.
thinking about what are the different pieces. I mean, it's one of those things where there are a lot of things that are probably good for you to be doing anyway, like eating healthy, getting physical activity. But for ADHD, it can be even more helpful and even more beneficial to really function optimally. And so I'm
Mhm.
wondering, what are a couple recommendations you have in terms of like taking that step back and really thinking about those kinds of pieces to kind of look at someone as a whole person?
Yeah. Let's start with just like physical health. I think that, yeah, with a normal person, if you aren't getting enough sleep, your brain isn't going to be functioning properly. Your memory is going to be terrible. You're going to be distracted. It's going to be really hard to focus. So I would say sleep is so fundamentally important and unfortunately really difficult for us ADHDers sometimes. But what has really helped me is having a sleep routine and a really nice wind down routine in the evening that's something I can look forward to. And reducing scrolling at night. This has made such a big difference in actually having more dopamine and motivation the next day. Even just 1 hour without screens before bed has really made a substantial difference for me. So that's one thing I would say that's like a really huge ROI is no screens 1 hour before bed. And then another one I would really recommend is protein intake. I aim to get 30 grams of protein with each meal. Protein is a precursor or helps your body to make more dopamine, and it will also help you to stabilize blood sugar. So you're not going to be crashing, you're not going to be as moody as much. Also, exercise, getting some of that uh, excess energy out of you is going to be really important. Going for long walks and maybe taking some time away from the screens again on those long walks. You'll be amazed at what ideas come through. And then something else that might be a little bit unique that I do from like a holistic perspective is I actually really like to look at limiting beliefs in ADHD because very often we have very destructive beliefs that hold us back from getting what we want in life. Like, for example, I can't focus, or there's not enough time, or not enough energy, I'm not good enough. And we take a lot of action from our beliefs. And so if we can identify these limiting beliefs and then maybe change them and realize that, well, maybe this is just a belief, maybe it's not truth. And then implement a new empowering belief. This has changed my life, and I've seen it be so helpful for a lot of other ADHDers out there.
Yeah, so I think what you're getting at sounds like it's the idea of the mindset. The idea
Yeah.
that it's, if you have a negative mindset and you think, I can't focus, I can't do this, chances are you
Hmm.
probably can't. But the
Yeah.
idea is basically by, you know, again, you have to be realistic about it. Like, I think the idea, I think probably one of the things I see the most is this feeling of, oh, I don't have enough time. I
Hmm.
mean, so one of the things I'll do with people, just as an example, is, like let's say the morning routine. So
Hmm.
I have someone basically, and you can, listeners can sort of do this at home. Basically, write down every single thing you do from the time you get up until you start working or go to work, and look at how long they're supposed to take. The first thing is if everything you're fitting in, if it that actually takes more time than you actually have available in the morning, clearly the plan is not working. And it's not going to work unless you adjust something. So I think the first thing is to sort of look at what's actually realistic in terms of the planning and the time you have. And again, I think there's some stuff you can obviously move different times of the day that sometimes make a difference. But, I think for people that have a lot on their plates, I think that's also like, how would you approach that? For someone that has a lot on their plate and there's not a whole lot that they can really offload, how do you navigate that when there is sort of a reality to kind of the limited time?
Yeah, really beautiful question. Where I really like to start is to help people prioritize because with ADHD, time blindness is very common and it's normal to see time as now and not now. And so you might have this massive to do list and it might feel like everything needs to be done right now. And that can create so much overwhelm, stress, task paralysis. And so just taking a deep breath, looking at that list, and I personally like reducing my list down to 3 things at a time. I get more than 3 things done in one day,
Yeah.
but, I have this system, and I call it the 3M, 1M system, and so you pick 3 of your most important tasks that you should do, and that could be tasks that really move the needle towards your goals or to what you're building. It could also be tasks that are urgent or tasks that are just causing you, like, a lot of pain, like, maybe something that's just been weighing on you, and so pick the 3 most important ones. It doesn't have to be perfect. Learning to prioritize is a skill that you build over time. And then of those 3, your number 1 must do. And as I always say, as long as I get my number 1 must do done, that's a win. But I even have a rule for myself too of my number 1 must do, I'm just gonna have a minimum 2 minutes. Because very often we can look at that task list or look at that number 1 must do and just feel very like overwhelmed by it or just not have the energy, the drive, the motivation to get it done. So I say to myself, okay, all I have to do is 2 minutes. And if it's painful and it's boring and I hate it, I can stop. But if I start and do 2 minutes, usually I get the dopamine and I finish the whole thing and it's never as bad as I thought it was going to be.
No, that's definitely really helpful. And I think this idea of like as a starting point, thinking about, as you said, the 3 things can be a good starting point. And again, I think I really appreciate you mentioning the fact that you get more than 3 things done a day. Because I think that's one of the things that, when I see people use that kind of strategy, that's sort of the next question is, I can't actually if I only get 3 things done, I would never get half the stuff done or probably less than half. But I think what I also see too with along those lines of planning is the idea that, it's really helpful to plan. You have to have flexibility because no matter how good you are at planning, things pop up, things take longer than you think. So, a lot of times, probably the most common reaction to when I talk with someone about planning is their thought of, I'm going to make a plan. It's not going to work within 5 minutes. Why bother planning?
Mm.
And so like, I often think about like viewing like planning as sort of like a general framework that you use and you try to stick to it, but you have to have built-in flexibility. And the idea it's okay to adjust stuff, but to be intentional with adjusting stuff, not just adjusting stuff because you just don't truly feel like doing it. And that, and also the idea of, if you're going to schedule something to a different time or different day, don't just pick a random time or day. Like look at your schedule and figure out when you're actually available. Because if you plan out your time and it actually makes sense, like in terms of how you plan it out, then you're more likely to be successful at getting those things done because the plan's right there to use to create that framework and structure.
I completely agree with this. And something that I have found to be incredibly helpful is actually having 2 routines for many things, like 2 morning routines. And one is a best case scenario routine where, okay, I wake up, I feel great, I feel like I can handle the world, and so I can do my full routine. And a worst case scenario where I'm having a low dopamine day, or maybe it's just not a good day hormonally. And I just have one thing that if I do this one thing, then I feel like my whole morning was a success. And so just knowing that your brain is going to be different every single day and planning around that can be really helpful.
I appreciate you sharing that. And I think to sort of add to that, the idea also think about energy level. Like
Yes.
oftentimes, I think when people think about planning out tasks, even if they like are really have it really planned out based on time, the problem is you don't take into account what is your expected energy level going to be like at a certain time. Like if you plan
Mhm.
to get a ton of stuff done each evening, but you have very little energy at that point, you're probably not going to get most of those things done, especially if they're not super essential. And so actually, like in the same thing with the most important tasks, if you do those at the times when you're optimally focused and have the most energy, you're probably going to do a better job getting them done. So I think being mindful of the energy level. And again, if you have like a night where you don't sleep well and things like that, you have certain things that really require a lot of energy, but are not, super time sensitive, then, readjusting those to, let's say, another day, if you can, may help to actually get them done more easily.
Yeah, completely agree.
And what about, I mean, so there's obviously the nutrition is certainly another part of it. And I think that's an area that I think a lot of times people don't really think about with ADHD. I mean, you hear of like various things over the years, I think have mostly been debunked in terms of some like random like diets and stuff for kids. But,
Mhm.
the idea of thinking about realistically, what are the nutrients that people with ADHD, sort of, potentially need more maybe than other people. And obviously you see all these commercials for, various, supplements and things like that that, sort of marketed to kind of take a stimulant. And I think looking at for people to really understand like what about that is a truth or is accurate, what's completely inaccurate, and how do you like approach developing this kind of stuff for yourself as an individual person based on your own unique needs.
Yeah, that's an amazing question. So, with nutrition, there's a lot of really solid clinical research around how protein can be beneficial for ADHD. And to really simplify nutrition, I always like to say, like, actually do less. And so, where I have found a lot of wins for myself and a lot of wins for my clients is just eating about 80% whole foods. Like, did it once come from an animal? Did it come from the ground? The more you can minimize processed foods, the less you're going to have inflammation. And that inflammation is going to affect your ability to focus, to think clearly. It's going to affect your energy levels. And so, if you can just minimize your exposure to inflammation, you're going to get a huge win from that. And so, it's not about eating like blueberries are better, strawberries are better, what have you. It's just usually the cleaner, the better is a guideline I really like to give. And then supplements are an amazing tool. I think we call them supplements for a reason. They're meant to supplement, not be used instead of healthy lifestyle choices. Some I've personally had really good success with is L-tyrosine, which is another precursor to dopamine, the amino acid that comes in protein. That can give you quite a good boost in energy and focus. Another one I really like is L-theanine. This increases GABA in the brain, so it can really help with racing thoughts. It gives you a bit of a sense of calm, but not in a way that's sedating. So it's really helpful for focusing. Omega 3s, there's lots of great research around omega 3s for ADHD. And then another one I really like is saffron, which can help to boost norepinephrine and serotonin. And so it can be really helpful for mood and ADHD.
And if someone was interested in kind of getting started with stuff, what do you feel like would be the safest way for someone to do that? Because obviously, if someone takes certain supplements and, based on either genetic stuff or, other health conditions or other medications, obviously I imagine certain things may mix with each other and not always be great.
Yeah, I completely agree. I always say, like, if you have any existing conditions or are on medications, like, definitely check with your doctor. They will know far better than I will. Another great option is just checking with AI and other resources online and doing a full check for yourself. And then once you start taking the supplement, I never suggest taking like 5, 6, 7 things at one time because then you have no idea what's working. I would say try something, try one thing for like 2 or 3 weeks, see how it goes, and then adjust, take more, take less, or add something else on.
No, I mean, that definitely makes sense.
Mm.
One thing, and the same could actually be said about stimulant medication as well, is that a lot of times people don't really, they may think, oh, it's working, or maybe it's not. But looking at like a concrete way to actually track how you're feeling, is there anything that you use in terms of like actually like measuring to be able to measure the success like of how people feel in different ways or level of focus, like anything like standardized that you use as a way to help people to measure is whatever I'm doing working?
Yeah, yes. So if you have a smart device like an Oura Ring or a Fitbit, I find, looking at your sleep score can be really helpful to see if something's working or not. Your heart rate variability to see if you're improving how you are handling stress. And then there's a few apps out there that work for tracking. One of my favorites is Supplements.ai. So you can actually like put in your supplements, your medications, and at different times in the day, it will prompt you to ask like how you're feeling. Did you take your medication? And then it will print out a report on how we were doing and if you've improved that month. So that's a really good way to keep track of it.
Yeah, no, I think that this sounds great. And I think the sort of easier the better. And so the
Yeah.
idea is you don't want to create a a comprehensive tracking system that's really complicated to use.
Hmm.
So, assuming you have a phone, which I realize most people do these days, especially adults, that's often a great resource of a place to put it down, whether it's in a formalized app, in a note in the notes app. It's something organized and simple where you're going to be able to remember to track it, I think will definitely help. And I think also just using whatever you have built into your phone. So, for example, if you have an iPhone, the health app and looking at, the various prompts that you can set for it to remind you to, record how you're feeling, things like that. Because I think the more you can have stuff integrated, that and also when you do all these different things, it can be a good idea to basically write out the whole plan together. So instead of like trying to rely on your memory for all of it, have like one place where it shows all different things you're doing. So medications, what if you want to meditate at a certain time of the day, like whatever it is, just put it all in at one place. Your workout routine. So this way you can just see it all together. Because I think that will also help. Because a lot of times ADHD, it's hard to keep track of, and you have all these different things. But if you don't really have it all in one place, it's harder sometimes to visualize what's working, what you're trying to do.
I completely agree. And I think this is where like reminders also help a ton with remembering to take medication. I have, my daily supplement reminders. And in that supplement reminder, I put exactly what supplements I should be taking. And that's also helpful for me to go back and be like, okay, well, this month I was clearly taking these supplements and I think that I nailed it. And how did I feel? And just taking a few moments to connect in and ask yourself, okay, did this make me feel better? Did I notice any change? Was I a little bit more focused or had a little bit more energy?
Exactly. Because I think the problem is if you try to go back and think, oh, a week ago, how did I feel? If there's nothing sort of significant about that day or week, you're probably not going to remember. Like if you
Mhm.
like tried to remember back, what did you have for lunch 2 Tuesdays ago? You're
Yeah.
probably, our system probably is not going to remember. But if it was some special occasion, it was a birthday or it was a holiday or something, you might be a little more likely to remember because there's something more meaningful about that memory. But the point is that being able to kind of track stuff makes it much easier to go back and try to figure it out. In terms of what you're trying to remember.
Yeah, and then you eventually know what's worth taking, what's worth doing, because especially at the start of your ADHD journey, you try so many things, or at least I did. And a lot of my clients did. They order tons of different supplements, try all these workout routines, different kinds of planners, apps, you name it. And so it's really helpful to have an idea of what actually is working.
Yeah, no, and I think with the planners, what I always think is really interesting is, a lot, especially the electronic ones like Todoist and TickTick, and some of the others, I mean, while certain ones obviously can be quite different, a lot of times the general principles are pretty much the same in the different ones. And if you have someone that's tried a million ones and none of them seem to work, I find it's often more about kind of the user and how you use them and plan stuff out within it that often becomes more of the challenge or how they can work effectively rather than the specific app itself.
Completely. It has to be as user friendly and as frictionless as possible. So as long as you remember and you can find it, then that's the best solution. My solution for keeping track of everything is literally a pinned notes in my notes app because I have an iPhone and a MacBook, so they're connected. And then every time I think of something that I need to do, it just goes in my list and then it gets scheduled in my calendar. And so I have my notes and I have my calendar and I live and breathe by that system.
Well, that's great. I mean, I always find it really fascinating to learn what people do for that kind of stuff. I don't know. I mean, I guess because I work with this stuff, so I always find it really interesting to
Mm.
learn. How do people keep track of different tasks and how do they do it? And like what I do, for example, is I mean, I pretty much use the reminders app for everything. I have a work
Mhm.
account, and a personal account, and I have certain ones that some lists are shared on both, so I can see it from both devices. But since I have all Mac stuff, I can see it all on my computer. And so I have, task, day and time planned out. And then, with newer upgrades to iCalendar, I can actually see it in the calendar as well. It was funny. I mean, years ago, or maybe it was like 2 or 3 years ago, like like the app stopped letting me put calendar events in and tasks. And so I spent about 8 hours on the phone with Apple. And it turned out that apparently at that point, there was a limit to how many tasks and calendar events you could have. And so apparently I maxed it out somehow because because I never thought to delete the tasks when they're done. So I had like, probably like 50,000 tasks. And so like I had to like go through with them and like delete every single one in order to like and then I think they've since changed the way they do it. So it's not you don't technically have to go and delete them. But if anyone ever runs into that issue, sort of sometimes because it saves all the tasks unless you actually delete them, it does take up space sometimes in their system.
Oh, wow, that's good to know. Such a crazy problem to have.
Yeah. But I do think also with the planning, I think one of the things that's can be challenging I see for a lot of people is this idea of if you have a lot of like little things to do, the idea that unless you really space them out very carefully in a list, you may have a lot that overlap.
Mm.
And so the other problem though is if you then ignore all your alarms and alerts. So I think the idea is also being intentional with what things you choose to put into an app and get an alarm for. Because if you get too many ones, you're going to probably start to ignore them after a while.
Yes, that is very much a challenge. And that is something that's I find very individual. Some people are so good at responding to alarms and other people just ignore. So finding a way that works for you to remember and to actually take action on the things that are important for you, yeah, is really important.
Yeah, and I think even just looking on your device to see how the reminders are set, because
Mhm.
sometimes, because you can go into notification center, for example, on an iPhone, you can change whether it's a banner or whether it stays on the screen. And like those can make a big difference for some people in terms of actually even seeing the alert in the first place to pay attention to it.
Yeah, or using colors too on my calendars, I color code things. So and then I see something is in green, I'm like, "Oh, okay, this is, like, really important. This has to get done soon." And if I see something in, like, yellow, I'm like, "Okay, like, this needs to get done, but if I snooze this or I miss this, it's okay." And so that's also helpful to use colors or other kind of anchors, yeah, that are really helpful for telling you, "Okay, this is important," or maybe not so much.
Yeah. And in terms of thinking about like, obviously there's a task list and a calendar, email is another thing that a lot of people struggle with. And so I'm
Mm.
wondering, do you have any suggestions for people on how to, keep on top of emails in terms of responding to them and not having a ridiculously large number of unread emails? That's probably one of the big, when I sort of talk to in adults, that's often one of the biggest things is, having hundreds or thousands of unread emails.
Yeah, I have a few suggestions because this comes up very, very often with clients. And one of the first things we do actually is work on our anxiety or email resistance. So, very often when we see this large amount of emails or even one email, we have a tendency to either feel overwhelmed by it or we have told ourselves a story that is really disempowering. Like, an email might only take 2 minutes to respond to, but you might have a limiting belief of thinking this is going to be really, really hard, or I'm afraid of the response that I might get. So, step one is actually looking at the anxiety and what's holding you back from writing those emails in the first place. So I always instruct my clients to actually regulate before they even like open their emails and tell themselves like put your hand on your heart and say, "Okay, like I am safe. Nothing bad's going to happen. I can totally handle this." And then I work on the story. Like, "Okay, like why do I feel blocked by answering these emails and how can I shrink this? How can I make I've made a monster out of something that's actually a golden retriever puppy. And so, can I tell myself a better story about the email? Like maybe, oh, this is going to be easy, or I only have to do 2 minutes. Or sometimes I do this thing called the what if rocket ship, which helps me get dopamine. Is I'll have tasks that I don't want to do, but I'm like, what if this is the email that makes me a ton of money or starts a chain of really good things that happen? And so you can tell yourself any story. Like literally everything in life is super neutral. Like we are the ones that assign things meaning. So maybe you can tell yourself a really empowering story. So that's one way to even just get started. Sometimes email answering times work for people, just blocking a certain like amount of time in your day where like this is when I answer emails because we can either tend to like completely ignore them or get taken away by them. Like every email that comes in, you get interrupted and then you go answer it. And so I would say both
Yeah.
aren't good. And so putting boundaries around that. And then the third tool I would suggest is, also using AI to help. AI has its like pros and cons, definitely
Yeah.
for safety for the brain. So it's very, very nuanced, but it can be incredibly helpful as someone with ADHD. If you have Gmail, there's Gemini that helps you type a response. And so for me, when I have this freeze and I'm like, oh, I have no idea what to say, sometimes AI can just like get you started and then you reword it in your own words. And that can be really helpful. And if you are a little bit more on the tech savvy side of things, like you can have an AI bot go through all of your emails and like type up drafts. I don't personally do this for like safety and security reasons, but I have clients that do it. Literally all their emails are now that they have to respond to are just sitting in drafts. So they have to just go read through the draft, edit a little bit here and there, and then press send. And that's been really helpful for some people.
Yeah, well, I think those are great strategies. I appreciate you sharing those. And I think in addition to sort of just the anxiety about responding, feeling overwhelmed, it's also the idea of, sometimes when you have so many unread emails to start, it's hard to, feel like you can really make a dent in it. And one of the things that I often work on with people is the idea, especially if you have an iPhone, there's a button where you can hit select all and you can hit mark as read. So any emails at that point that are still on the iPhone, you can basically have to hit, click of a button, get it to zero unread emails and as a starting point. And from there to then have like a clear plan each day of, by the time you go to bed, get it back to inbox zero. The idea of not having any unread emails by the end of the day. Because
Hmm.
then it's the idea is like once you kind of have that fresh starting point, the idea then is to work on maintaining it. But if you feel like never get to that starting point, then it's going to be hard to keep track of. If I have 1,442 versus 1,052 unread emails, you have to really look carefully to see if you have any new ones. But if you have zero unread emails and there's no icon, then suddenly there's an icon, clearly it's an actual new email. I mean that, and also trying to maybe keep work and personal email separate, and also unsubscribe from as much as you can in
Hmm.
order to reduce the amount of spam that you get, and even having different accounts for things or using folders, like for listservs, for example. Have it, if it's not stuff you necessarily need that much, but you occasionally want to look at it, have it bypass the inbox and go to a folder. And then this way, your email's not flooded with listserv posts, but you can click a button and go into a folder anytime you want. Or there's a program called Unroll Me, where basically you connect it to your email account and it'll basically identify things you're subscribed to. And it lets you either unsubscribe from them or keep it, and then it sends you a daily update with emails, from all of those ones that you've kept.
Well, that's awesome. I'm definitely stealing that
Yeah,
tactic.
it's fun.
That's
I've used
amazing.
I've used it a fair amount over time too. It's definitely interesting. Like I think it's really good at getting you started. I think some of the I mean, Yahoo has some of that stuff built in now, and I think I saw something recently. Gmail may I think maybe offering something along those lines a little bit too. I mean, I don't think it's quite as comprehensive as Enrollment is, from what I recall, but again, it's great. It's also free too.
Hmm. Yeah, that's an amazing tool. Actually, one other thing I will add is with these tasks that feel really daunting or boring, is seeing if there's a way that you can bring like fun, novelty, joy, and excitement in it. And I just want to give you an example with taxes because I used to dread doing my taxes. It was the bane of my existence. I would like stress about it, put it off, putting it off would stress me. And so now what I've done is I've made tax day one of the funnest days of the year. So whenever I do my taxes, I go pick a new restaurant that I've never been to before. I like order nice food for myself. I listen to really good music. I get dressed up. And then I always plan something really fun for the night after, the day after. So I treat myself after doing taxes to like a fun night out with friends or like maybe a spa day the next day. And now taxes has changed from something I used to like dread and fear to something I look forward to. And so maybe with emails, you have an email time writing block. And at that time of day, you make yourself like your favorite coffee or tea, you put nice music, you light candles. And then all of a sudden, it's not this like horrible thing you have to do. You're like, oh, it's actually not so bad.
Yeah, no, I think it's great to kind of, have a time for it and kind of set the mood and to sort of, try to make it more fun.
Hmm.
And I think even also the idea of, doing it where it's also like even like creating like a time crunch for yourself. Like if you're someone that has a hard time kind of moving through emails and you spend a lot of time writing them, to basically set a timer, let's say for 10 minutes, and get through as many emails as you can in 10 minutes. Because a lot of times you're going to move faster if you're under a time limit.
Totally.
So like that for a lot of stuff can work well too. But and I guess before we conclude for today, is there anything else that you want to share with the audience that we haven't gotten to that you feel like is especially helpful for them to know in terms of ideas for for kind of thriving with ADHD?
Yes. I would say the biggest piece that I would love everyone to know is that ADHD comes with superpowers. And I know it's hard and I know there's things that are frustrating, but your ability to see the big picture, problem solve, come up with really creative solutions, and you have this amazing ability to hyper focus, like these are all amazing skills and gifts. So I think I would love to challenge your listeners to just ask yourself the question of what are my superpowers and think a little bit differently about their ADHD, that maybe I'm someone that comes with superpowers and having these superpowers also comes with some liabilities versus looking at it the other way around of like, I'm broken and sometimes I have some cool skills. Looking at it from this way is just such a more powerful place of being. And we really do take action from our beliefs and our identity. So if you can identify somebody who has amazing superpowers, that will take you really far in life.
Great. Well, thank you for sure. I think that's definitely a good final thought. And I guess if people want to reach out to you, where can they find you?
Yeah, I'm Chloe Goes Inward on all social platforms on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube.
We'll make sure to get that in the show notes. And I guess I was curious what I'm asking. Where does the name come from? Like, is there? I don't know. It sounds like there could be some significance to what you do, but I would love to hear it if you're okay sharing that.
Yes, absolutely. So, in inward, Clay Goes Inward is all about my journey inward, and I'm sharing with other people. One of my biggest goals with coaching and the message I have to share with the world is that like everything you need is already inside of you. Everything you need already exists within you. So I really like teaching tools that are body based, mindset based, that you can do anytime, anywhere. And I love helping people just find the power that exists within them. You don't need the outside world to change. It's like you need to change your inner world, and then that will be reflected in the outside world.
It's a very powerful message.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, great. Well, thanks a lot for being on today. And for all of you out there, thanks a lot for listening. If you like this episode, definitely like it, subscribe so you can keep up with future episodes, and share with a friend who may need it. And definitely pay attention and be new episodes coming out fairly soon as well. Take care, everyone.